Thank you, Stuart. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I've learned one thing in a think tank is that nobody ever resents if you get out early. You know, so I'm going to do my darndest here if we can get people out early. I think it's one of the most underappreciated things in town. Anytime you get a little bit of time back in your calendar, everybody's happy. Again, let me say thank you, especially thank you to our commissioners who made the extra effort to get here today. We have a great number of retired ambassadors who are with us, with members of Congress. We have several, not members of Congress, but staff from Congress who are with us, State Department officials, etc. And too many for me to go through and acknowledge by name, but I specifically want to say thank you to all of you for coming. I'm really delighted to have you here. We would like to begin by formally presenting this report to the person that got us going, and that was to Undersecretary for. So if I might ask, especially so we could take some pictures, I would like to ask our two co-chairs, George Argyros and Mark Grossman, along with Undersecretary for, to come up to the front and we can formally present the report to her. Why don't you stand right up here? Yeah, why don't you stand right up? Yeah, that'd be
good. Well, Undersecretary for, as John said, this report really is a result of a conversation that you had with him, and George and I and all of the commissioners are very, very grateful for the opportunity that you've given us to work on this report. As I've told you a number of times, and I know George has as well, our objective here is to help the State Department. Our objective is to make these recommendations practical recommendations that people, if they have the will, can do. And I know that you have the will to do that. So we are honored, and on behalf of my co-chairs and on behalf of all of the commissioners here and the very large number of people who worked on this, we'd like to present to you a copy of the Embassy of the Future.
Thank you, Mark.
All these wires.
Come here.
Why don't the co-chairs sit down? And Henrietta, would you like to say just a few words?
Thank you very much, John. I hope we could also get a picture at the end with all the commissioners.
That's a great idea.
If that would be possible. May I just say thank you. You all have really done something here in a year's time, something that was just a twinkle in our eye, that we knew that we could use help on the management portfolio, something that Tom Boyat and I started talking about a long time ago. But what you have done is you've created a report that is practical. And so we're going to be very interested in reading more about it and getting into it. And I know that Secretary Rice and Deputy Secretary Negroponte would wish to be here today because this lays a good foundation for our Department of State, one of the great institutions we have in the United States. So may I thank you, John, as President of CSIS. May I thank Ambassadors Grossman, Argyros, and Roayton, who is not here, for their leadership, to Ann Witkowski for doing all the hard work. Ann, wherever you are. Thank you so much, Ann. And also to the Una Chapman Cox Foundation, which is always by our side, looking for ways to improve diplomacy, and to all the commissioners. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to amplify a little bit on this report in a bit of a dialogue with you, and we're going to try to bring in other commissioners with us, and also, frankly, hopefully some of you in the audience. But let me begin by posing a question to Mark Grossman. If you look at this report, it starts with a very important discussion about what is diplomacy now in this age. What do we need in embassies and diplomats going forward? Mark, could you start us off with that?
Well, thank you very much. And just let me thank you all for coming again. I thank my co-commissioners and all the people who were on this commission. And I just would like to send a second round of thanks to Ann Witkowski. And thank you very much from all of the commissioners. answering this question about what is diplomacy about today allows me also to highlight a very important part of this report, and that is the views and the opinions of people from the State Department. And I thank all the people at the department who helped us out, but I especially thank all of those who are serving abroad. And you will notice that throughout the report we have put quotation after quotation after quotation from our officers, men and women who are serving the United States of America abroad. And I must say that speaking to them and getting their opinions was one of the most exciting and uplifting parts of being on this project. And we have tried, as I said to the Undersecretary, very hard to make sure that this report is in support of the people who are on the front line doing this new business. I think, John, the most important thing here is that the challenges that the United States faces, not just only after September the 11th, but before September 11th as well, are requiring that we think in new ways about the profession of diplomacy. When I started as a diplomat 33 or 34 years ago, and many of the people in this room, diplomacy was about the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union and the Cold War, and it was about a kind of formalized way of having an interaction with another government or with the elites in a country, and those things are still important, as our report says. But the challenge now is to somehow change this profession of diplomacy from being one where people were sent abroad to observe and to report back to other people who made decisions, to a profession in which our people on the front lines are active and making decisions and putting out programs and trying to influence, as we say in the report, the millions and millions of people in this world who are at a tipping point in trying to understand and decide whether the United States is a positive or a negative force in this world. And so the idea of changing diplomacy from what I said was an observation and a reporting profession into an active profession is key to this. If you look at the jobs that our people abroad are being asked to do today, what are they? They are promote democracy, promote sustainable development, stop the trafficking in human beings and women and children, to fight narco-trafficking, fight narco-terrorism. All of these things are jobs that can't be done by talking point and can't be done by someone else telling you what this is all about. They are things that have to be done at the front end. And so our report is an attempt to capture the idea that there's a new requirement for a new diplomacy and that the State Department needs to change in many ways. And that's why we've recommended that there be more people. And that's why we've recommended that there be better and more technology and it be used in a more creative fashion. And that's why we have recommended, if those two things are true, that we think in new ways about the platforms that we use abroad, and so that our people can be out and doing the active work of the United States of America. And if those three things are true, then we also need to have a conversation about risk. Because if you're putting more people out into the front and doing active diplomacy, which I believe, and I think I speak on behalf of all of our commissioners that we believe, then you increase the amount of risk that is involved in our people, and that is something that our society will have to consider and our society will have to debate. So we took this idea that there's a new profession out there, and people who are starting in diplomacy today, I think, are pioneers in a wonderful new profession. I don't know what it'll look like 30 years from now when they are sitting here, but it's going to be different. And they're starting out as pioneers, and we need to give them the support that we need so there are enough of them, and then they have the right technology, and they have the right platforms, and that we're letting them do the right job for the 21st century.
Thank you, Mark. You touched on this question of security. And George, you had to live with this every day. I mean, when you're the ambassador, you have to decide what are things that we need to do, what are things that are safe to do. How did you wrestle with that? How do you think about this new future where we're balancing security and risk and diplomacy?
Well, first of all, as a presidential appointment and not being a careerist, and you go into this newfound wonderful world of diplomacy representing our government, it's a real shock to realize the risk that our people have when they're in these foreign countries. And at home here, we don't think about that, as you well know. But there is risk, and we have to be sensitive to it. And I think that what I found, number one, I think our people, by and large, do a fantastic job at the embassies protecting our own people and making sure we're trying to be as secure as we possibly can in this day and age. On the other hand, you don't want to do anything that actually cuts you off from really performing your role, and that is really people to people, and having our people out there with the various countries, being able to move around freely and to do their job. But I found that it was a unique experience to take someone from the business community and put him out there as an ambassador after my very fast training, Henrietta. But I will say it was extremely rewarding. But the people that actually are there every day, the careerists in our State Department, are really fantastic people, and they take risk every day. And there's no way in the world we're ever going to be able to cover that risk. But we've got to really work on our education process to make sure that people are well-trained and are prepared to be able to react in any kind of a situation. But I found that our teams on site are really well-schooled in the sense of watching for protection, etc. But more than that, they really enjoy doing the work that they do. And we want to be careful not to turn our people off. They become overly concerned about security, so they stop doing what they do best, and that's people to people in these other countries. And I think that's important.
Could I pick up on this? Because I think if 9/11 did anything to this country, it made us afraid. And of course, you don't conduct diplomacy by just being afraid. You had to strike that balance, and you had to get people out and make that assessment. Do we have clear enough understanding? I'd ask both of you. I mean, you both have been ambassadors. Is it clear enough in our direction to our ambassadors how to strike this balance between security and mission?
Well, I'd ask, maybe if I could, Frank Taylor to help me out and help us both out here. But I think the point of our report was that you have a situation now where ambassadors have received the either written instruction or the mental message that force protection, force protection, force protection is the most important thing that you can do. And I want to be clear that there's not a soul on this commission who is saying that ambassadors should have that responsibility lifted from them. Ambassadors are responsible for the people who are working for them. But the idea that we are going to win more friends, get more allies, and defeat our enemies by not taking more risk, I think it was the general view of the commission that, as we said in the report, that there has to be some adjustments in the instructions to ambassadors, in the way that the accountability review boards work, if, God forbid, there's some kind of incident, so that force protection is balanced in some useful fashion with the job that needs to be done.
Sure.
I felt our people really really pulled their own weight, and meaning that they became much more aware after 9/11 and some of the other things that happened. And I think, as you mentioned, Frank, it was an all-out effort to make sure people were aware. I think that's the biggest thing. If we can make people aware of where they are in their surroundings, and to just be careful, but don't let it override the real mission that we have. It's too important.
Frank, can you jump in here? Because I know that you spent a lot of time. Frank Taylor was the head of diplomatic security and spent a lot of time working through this. Frank, your thoughts on this?
I certainly had a great amount of work in the risk area. I think the issue in the department, I think the department has matured significantly since 1986 when the Omnibus Diplomatic Security Act was passed. And that act created, I think, a momentum in the department that was about risk avoidance as opposed to risk management. In the department in the future, I think we've got a sound enough foundation on security that risk management is possible. But we have to change our own expectations and that of the Congress and of the American people, that now diplomats go into harm's way as military people go into harm's way, with the appropriate training, with the appropriate leadership, and with the appropriate understanding that that mission, in the judgment of the ambassador and the diplomat, needs to be done. And that there are risks that happen. Those risks may result in serious injury or even death, but that's a part of the mission. It's a part of what we accept in the diplomatic service.
Thank you.
May I
Please.
just add one more point, and I think George touched on it, and it's also a very important part of this report, is that one of the reasons that we focused on the report on the kinds of platforms that are necessary in the future is they are both part of getting people out farther along and simultaneously making sure that they are safe. So as George said, as people go out, you need to think in new ways about the platforms from which they operate. And one of the reasons I think that the report has to be seen as a whole is, as I say, it's about people and technology and training and platforms and risk. And if you chop them all to pieces, and it doesn't make so much sense. But if you bring them all together, I think you can have an embassy of the future.
You touched on this question, Mark, of people, and one of the things you see in this report is a call that we need to properly staff this department. We're constantly short of people. Do you want to speak to this? And then I think maybe we'll reach out and ask Bob Pearson to say a word here.
Well, I don't know if I have anything to add. Our experience is that when Secretary Powell came to be the Secretary of State, one of the things that we considered at the time was that as a military officer, every unit he had ever supervised, ever commanded, had 15%, in the neighborhood of 15% of people for training in transit. And we did not have that at the State Department, never had it at the State Department. And we thought to ourselves, well, here's somebody actually who's going to understand this issue, and as Jim Dyer can say, might be able to speak to it on Capitol Hill, because this is not without its expense. And Secretary Powell committed to increasing the number of people at the State Department by in the neighborhood of just over 1,100 people over 3 years. Cost $98 million a year, and that was a program that Ambassador Pearson and others carried out with great skill. But there was Afghanistan, and there was Iraq. And when we look at these issues today, I can't imagine what the State Department would have done without those wonderful, amazing new people. But we are still in a position, we believe, in recommending to the department that there still is no float for training in transit. And so you will find in the report a recommendation that the department begin now a program to hire 1,079 new people, which is a number that the department has chosen, and we, in our analysis, believe is the right one, for about $198 million over 3 years. And we believe that that will really be the beginning, down payment on trying to get the right number of people. Because as I say, you can have all these other recommendations in the world about technology and platforms and doing this and doing that. If you don't have enough people, it doesn't work.
Bob Pearson, Bob was the Director General for the Foreign Service. Would you just speak to this, Bob?
My colleagues obviously can speak eloquently sitting down, but I haven't mastered that skill, so I'm sorry, I have to stand up. Of course, I agree with everything that Mark has to say. I think that more important, if that's possible, than the 1,079 people is the commitment to a continuous float, a continuous group of people who are able to meet new emergencies. I guarantee that a year from now, that number would have been different. In fact, even maybe 2 weeks from now, that number would have been different. So the most important thing is that overall float. And that depends on two great institutions in this town. The Congress, and there are plenty of material in this report for authorization legislation that enables us to do the job that we need to have done. And then the three most important letters in the English alphabet in Washington, OMB. And so that has to be a commitment that enables this service to have the kind of resources it absolutely has to have, not tomorrow, not 3 years from now, but on a continuing basis. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. I just would point out to members, if you look on page 10 of this report, you will see a delineation of requirements for the State Department. I'll tell you, it took a lot of work to get this document together, this table together. It was hard to get the department to come to grips with, but if you take a look at it, they're not short 1,000 people, they're short 2,000 people. And if you just delineate what it takes to properly train people in languages, what it takes for people to get interagency experience, because you want that in more senior levels, etc. They are desperately short of people, and the float will get easily eaten up by simply meeting basic requirements. So I'd ask people to take a look at the larger picture, not just the 1,000 extra that we think we need for the float.
I think that the commissioners stuck with the 1,000. It was the number that we thought best analyzed. You'll see in the report that we hope the State Department will continue to improve its analysis. So the commission itself is not in any sense against the 2,000. We felt that 1,079 was the number that could best be justified, and Jim Dyer's recommendation and urging to us all throughout the commission was, make sure you know what you're asking for. But we do hope the department will continue to work that number, and if someday, soon, the analysis on the 2,000 is as good as the analysis on the 1,079, I think you would find commissioners speaking in favor of it.
Mark raised this question early on about what diplomacy is like, and of course we've had a very popular buzzword in Washington this last year. It's called public diplomacy. George, tell me what you were doing as an ambassador. You were the face of America to the Spanish people. Tell us about that, because we want to explore this public role.
Well, I think that the thing that the ambassadors, and many of you have served as ambassadors, et cetera, or have been out on a mission with the State Department that might be here today, I think that we have a huge role to be able to get out in these countries, not just live in our fortified headquarters of the embassy, but to have more outreach with the real people out there, whether it's on the commercial side or any of the other operations that we have in our embassies that we relate to. It's very important, I think, that we get out into the hinterlands, outside the capital, so that we can really let people understand what America's about and what we're trying to accomplish, and the fact that we're there to be of assistance to them, but also to help our own citizens in what we need to do. But I think we need more outreach, and it's difficult under the conditions in which we're living in today, where we're so concerned with risk. But I think it's extremely important, and several things in the report really align themselves with that. But we need to get our people out.
Could I ask Kenton Keith? Kenton specialized in public voice for the State Department. He's right next to Ann Witkowski. Kenton, I want you to speak to that, and then I would like to pick on Stuart Bernstein, who's talked about people to people, and Claudia, please, also. Kenton, please, right behind you, Kenton. He's right there.
Yes, public diplomacy has become a byword in recent years, as we have actually watched our public diplomacy resources sort of diminish over the years. The report does speak to the need to balance risk against the need to engage with foreign publics, to put more money into public diplomacy, particularly into our exchange programs, our flagship exchange programs, to put more money into the International Visitor Program and the Fulbright Program, also to give some real support and thinking and management support to such things as the American Corners programs that have been formed in various places, and to bring support to international, to our information centers and our American centers where they exist. But there are some very simple things that we can do to leverage the presence of private American citizens who are traveling abroad, whether they're performers or academics or others. But and USIA, the late lamented USIA, there was a system by which posts could be informed, and such a simple thing as that, which has disappeared, could be rejuvenated and be of great assistance to our posts abroad.
Claudia, would you speak to that?
Cynthia.
Oh, Cynthia, excuse me, I'm sorry.
It's
Cynthia
okay, John.
Snyder,
I just
forgive
snuck
me.
in. That's totally okay. It's totally okay. I just want to echo and put a strong exclamation point behind what Kenton has said. He served for many years in this capacity. I was only an ambassador for 3 years under President Clinton, but coming from a background as an art historian, I felt very strongly about the value and importance of culture as a dimension of diplomacy. And with the reduction in funding and even the integration of USIA into State Department, that former strength has diminished, ironically, at the same time as the strength of commercial culture in America grows to the point that it is now our strongest and largest export. So one way maybe to think about this, just to put a more specific point on what Kenton was saying, is that, you know, we are in the ironic situation of having our commercial culture be tremendously influential and tremendously popular throughout the world, not in an unmitigated way, but overall the marks and all the polls are positive. And I think a challenge to the State Department is not to reinvent the wheel necessarily, not to try to create TV shows and TV stations, but to think creatively about how to work with commercial culture as well as other kinds of American visitors, and work with this product that is already incredibly successful to improve the way we relate to and understand other people.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Stuart Bernstein, right over here, did a lot to pioneer people-to-people diplomacy when he was in the service. Right back here. Yeah, right here.
Mark, your opening remarks brought back a very nice memory for me. Before I went to post, and you were undersecretary, and I stopped by to see you and get some advice, you said, take your business skills and the way you run your business and go, and that's the kind of ambassadors we want today. And why this was such a meaningful experience for me is because I really felt that I could make a difference and felt that I did make a difference. And developing the relationships and reaching out, and especially with the higher echelons of the host country's government. What I found in the commission was so challenging, and I'd love to hear how we finalized some of the answers to this, was the physical structures and what they should be and how they should be. I know that I called a country town meeting, a town hall meeting right after 9/11 to hear and reassure all the people that worked in the embassy. In Denmark, we had about 150 people. And their concern was the physical building, and as a result, we were able to get a security building put up in front of the embassy, which meant a lot to them, and to reassure them that their concerns we were addressing. But it was a real pleasure and a real very interesting commission to be part of, and I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it, and I thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm going to turn to the physical building in a moment. I would like, before we get to that, however, to explore really the technological underpinning of diplomacy. I think everybody in Washington knows that every Wang computer was salvaged in order to get parts for the State Department for the last 10 years. I think it was the last place we ever used the Wang computers. And we are now racing to get into the 1980s, I think, in technology. But seriously, we are really making great progress. Either of you would like to speak to that, or should we turn to Tara Lemmy was with us. She's an expert in this space. She helped the commission enormously. Thank you very much, Tara. Why don't you just say a word about what should we be doing in terms of the technological underpinning for diplomacy?
Well, I think that it was exciting to see how much opportunity there is.
Put it a little closer.
Technology.
Yeah, it was. I just came last week. I spent the week at the Google Zeitgeist in Mountain View and told them I was coming to this meeting, and they said, "But you're not an ambassador." I said I was the ambassador from Silicon Valley. You know.
Thank goodness for that.
So So I just think that the report reflects the great energy and enthusiasm for the possibilities that the technology can bring. That the State Department has laid a very good foundation for where the information can flow to. However, starting to use the kinds of things that we're seeing being used in the private sector can really create innovation in how we reach out to people, how we engage with people, how we engage with each other around the world, and sort of open up a really different view of it. And I think as we explored that together, the commission as a whole was very enthusiastic about the possibilities. And so in the report, we embedded ways to start to encourage innovation through the things we know in the private sector work, piloting and bringing in little pieces and exploring and energizing that part of the platform.
May I just say we're deeply grateful to all of the insights that Tara brought, and what we learned in the commission all through, whether it was technology or buildings, that it's important to have the technology and it's important to spend the money and have the best. But what it really is about is changing the way people think about their jobs, and that the more they can think in a new way about their jobs, the more effectively then this wonderful new world of technology opens up. And the other thing that really struck me is, and we've put in, as I said, quotation, quotation, quotation from our people who are serving abroad, is they know what they want to try. And the people abroad are really ready to do new things in the technological field. And so with Tara's support and with the support of the rest of the commission, we hope the department will take on some of these things. And I think it's in the technology area in particular where things could be done tomorrow and next week and the next day at little or no additional expense, but with kind of a new way of thinking about the job.
Beth Jones, in our commission, you spent a fair amount of time talking about operating outside of the wall, beyond the embassy walls. I wonder if you'd speak to this, because it gets to this dependence on both, it's a business model and it's also a technology.
Thanks very much. I was just about to raise my hand to say I've got something to say here.
Good.
In the many interviews that we did with embassies and doing the sort of looking at what was really what they were working on and what might make sense, and asking them questions for how they are finding, what ways they are finding to get out, to manage risk, to use technology, what did they really need and what was important for them. Over and over again, they said they need BlackBerries, they need cell phones. They need the capacity to report from wherever they are right away so that they're not waiting to come back to report on whatever and have forgotten, or it's too late, or whatever the reason might be, that it was no longer appropriate to do the reporting. So you'll see in the report a variety of recommendations along those lines to allow people to be very flexible and to report immediately, which of course gets into classified, unclassified as well. One of the things, though, that many of the people that we interviewed, I don't know if the others had the same experience, you did quite a number of these interviews, there was a request also for training of the older people that are still in the Foreign Service so that they understood and appreciated the flexibility that these instruments would give to the reporting officers in the field. And by reporting officers, we also were thinking in terms of not just a traditional political officer and economic officer, but every single officer in every embassy becomes, in effect, a reporting officer and an advocacy officer, because so much of what they're doing is persuading people as they go along. The other element that came through repeatedly, as Mark has already talked about, is they all said we need more people. There's just way too much to do every day to do the work that the American people have asked us to do. But beyond people, it was resources, it was funding. We need money to get out. We need money for more cars. We need money for the security that we need to go into these various places. We need more money to operate the American Corners, to do the kinds of programs and advocacy events that are terribly important, because they can see with the little bit that they did have how much good it did. And they repeatedly asked us, just put in, we need more people and we need more funding.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to this question of the buildings. And Lou Goodman, thank you for joining us. I know that you had a constraint to get here. Lou spent a fair amount of time in our commission discussions talking about making our buildings emblematic of our vision, especially about green buildings. Would you just speak to this? Lou, I'd appreciate it if you would.
I think we want to take every opportunity possible to represent our country as well as we can around the world. And one of the big challenges facing the world today is climate change and global warming. So to the extent that we don't take opportunities to be energy efficient in our buildings, to experiment, to show the people in the countries around the world that we're concerned about these things and trying it in our own locale, we're losing an opportunity. So this report is a way to talk about the embassy of the future. We've talked about lots of the nitty-gritty that goes on in the embassies. There's some symbolic things that mean a lot to the future of the world and mean a lot to getting the message about what the United States is all about out to the rest of the world. I don't think we felt that we should miss that opportunity. That's one of the recommendations here in the report.
Thanks, Lou. I think it would be very much the feeling of the group that, you know, the embassy is a powerful platform for America, and it ought to reflect the kind of confidence and optimism that we have about ourselves. That ought to be the basis of our physical platform overseas, and that's why taking an advantage to rethink this and bring in attributes such as green buildings became a very compelling vision for our building. Yes, please. A question from right back here. We'll get a microphone over to you, and then I would like to turn to money.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate everybody concerned for a wonderful report, which I hasten to add the Foreign Affairs Council supports 100% since you came up with slightly fewer numbers than we did. We recommended an increase of 1,100 in our June report.
It's close enough.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. On a more serious note, it occurs to me that we are missing something very important and for very understandable reasons. But there's another dimension of diplomacy, and that's the development dimension. And when this study was begun, there was a separate authorization and appropriation on the Hill, and it wasn't exactly clear how it would be organized in the executive branch. Now, the entire development function is under the Secretary of State, and it's in the single 150 account. So we're all going to, in the months and years ahead, we're all going to have to, and I'm sure Henrietta already is, we're going to have to be thinking about what it takes to really staff the development diplomacy function.
Could I use this for a very unsolicited political statement? Could we please confirm the next director of USAID? Henrietta has agreed that she's prepared to serve in that capacity. We need to get her confirmed because the agency needs her leadership, and I think you're exactly right. This is an area that frankly does need a fair amount of solid relooking. America could do a great deal to restore its inspirational powers by embracing what it likes to do anyway, which is to help other people through development. And it would be a great thing to do it, and we're very hopeful, Henrietta, you can get in there unencumbered to be able to lead that. Let me just, finally, I'd like to turn very briefly to talk about, we have a couple of times talked about money. Beth, you mentioned that the department needs resources. We need people, we need the resources for buildings, etc. We were fortunate to have on this commission Jim Dyer. Jim is one of the great men of Capitol Hill. He was the staff director on the House Appropriations Committee, or actually the chief clerk, I think is the formal term they have there. But he also served down in the State Department for a time as well. He bridged across these two constituencies probably better than anybody I know. Jim, would you speak to this? How do we get the resources into this department that we're going to need?
I have a big mouth. I may not need
No.
Beth really said what I would have said to you anyway if I were giving a long speech. And that is that the department really needs resources. I always thought it was kind of tragic that, especially in the wake of 9/11, that we were all out providing all the proper funding for our military men and our soldiers and everybody else who was fighting the war on terror, but we were still shortchanging the Foreign Service, people overseas in diplomatic posts, or people from other agencies who had to conduct business overseas. I think in large measure, I hate to be critical of my own department, but for some reason that I don't totally understand, we've always been reluctant to ask, especially for money that goes overseas. Like somehow we're taking money away from programs that could be spent domestically. That's really a false conundrum. Americans now, perhaps more than ever, perceive that whether it's trade or diplomacy or public diplomacy or whatever it is, humanitarian efforts, our country's standing in the world, our success diplomatically and everything else we do is not just a function of how many troops or how many bullets or how many guns we can provide, but indeed how many ideas we can spread. And the people who are in the front lines of this effort are in the diplomatic community. And I would really hope that, and it's not just the State Department or AID, it requires an administration to be aggressive, and it requires a Congress to step up to the plate and really acknowledge what we all know to be a fact, and that is that these dollars are as important as anything that you do domestically or militarily. I would commend to all of you, as you read this report, you'll notice that after every subject matter, the last thing you talk about are resources. And that was done deliberately just to get you to read the whole thing. But they are an important part of our consideration. And I think this report will be successful in the context of how well policy planners are willing to step up to the plate and ask aggressively and openly and publicly for the resources to do this job.
Thank you, Jim. Let me just ask, are there questions from colleagues here that would like to pose a question to our chairs or to any other member of the commission? Yes, please, in the back, if we could get a microphone, right? We've got one coming to you.
Thank you. My name is John Brown, and my question to the panel is the new embassy in Baghdad the embassy of the future?
The answer to that question is no. We decided, sir, that of all of the things that were going on in the world, that we could not take what was happening in Baghdad and use it as the example for every place else in the world. We decided, right or wrong, and you will have to make that decision in reading the report, that Baghdad was over here. What was happening in Baghdad had to be happening in Baghdad, and decisions that were being made there were being made for Baghdad. It's not to say that no lessons can be learned from there, but in terms of a physical structure, a way to do business, we just thought it was so far over to one side that that we felt if it drove the rest of our report, the report would be skewed in a way that would not be helpful to the department.
If George, please.
God, I'd like to comment on it. I am very concerned that we're going to get our diplomacy headquartered too far too far away from where the real action is in these capitals, and it's a big problem. I know the experience we had in Spain, and we were in Madrid, and if I had a meeting where the president was or the other officials, it would take in traffic. It would take 45 minutes anyway, and we're in the city. If we were out of town and had to come in 2 hours, you wouldn't get anything done, and you couldn't get people out. So that's why it's so important, I think, that we stress not to get our embassies way out of the way for protection. What's really important is we have them inside, close to where the urban area is, where all the action is, for diplomacy. And we need to make sure that we use the opportunity to do the corners or the outreach programs that we have to locate people around the country. It's extremely important, but we can't become put huge walls around us that we can't get anything done, and we need to be close to where the action is.
Bill Barrett is here, and he's with Felix. Bill, because Felix couldn't be here, and I know Felix pioneered these new concepts. Do you want to say just a word here before? Caught you by surprise.
Yeah, it's tough subbing for Felix. He's very gratified with the report. I think to him it kind of rounds out a process that began more than a decade ago when he and Bob Pearson decided they would decentralize Embassy Paris and open American presence posts in regional cities in France. And he always, his mantra in those days was that we needed to go where our customers were. And at the time, we didn't have the overwhelming embrace of the entire department. But Felix being Felix, we were able to get things done. He was able to get things done. I think that he thinks that the principles espoused in this report can be transformational in allowing the Foreign Service to serve its publics, and I would just say that the other thing you would ask me to do if I said anything was to thank Ann Witkowski for the great job she did pulling this together. So.
Thank you, Bill. If you would indulge me to make a comment, George, picking up on what you just said about security. I'm a security guy. I mean, I've got cop's blood in my veins, so I tend to think about these a little differently. But I think we've got the wrong mental model about security in embassies. We tend to have a physical model in mind. It's a little like your own house. You got a fence around the yard. You got sensors maybe out at the door. You've got double locks on the doors. You've got maybe motion detectors for lights. We have a very physical model for security. I think we should have instead an anthropomorphic model. I think we ought to be thinking about this. How does a doctor stay well when they have to work in a hospital full of sick people? We really need to think about this in a different way. This is about nutrition. This is about exercise. This is about where you have to, putting on gloves and a respirator in very unusual circumstances. But it's how do you stay well in a dangerous environment. It's not how do you keep everything away from you. It's how do you operate in that environment. And if we think about this the way a doctor or a nurse thinks about carrying on their mission on a day-to-day basis in very difficult and dangerous circumstances, I think we'll be a lot better off than if we start thinking about this as how do we keep ourselves away from anything that's dangerous. So I think us cop types, Frank, you and I think are the two cop types here in the room. We got to change our way of thinking in order to help our embassies. We have to have both, yeah.
Inside the Capitol or outside. You have to have that, but you also have to, and the report points out that it's important to have training of officers in how they think about security. So security is not just something that's in the hands of diplomatic security or the ambassador, but every officer, as a part of their training, learns how to think.
Anthropomorphic.
Thank you.
That's a Harvard word. I learned that one.
I went to Notre Dame. I'm sorry. Training becomes a very important part of that because people can go lots of places and do lots of things if they have the situational awareness to understand security while they're performing their duties.
Which is, again, I think where I would make the pitch that you think about the report as a whole, is that if you slice bits off, it makes less sense. Whereas if you're going to do something about platforms, then you also have to do something about people and security and technology, and vice versa. The other thing I think that's worth mentioning here, I think you make a very important point, is in the interviews that we did, I think it's really important to recognize that people who are out there, they love being in safe, secure, clean, efficient places. And we didn't have that before. And so one of the things that is useful here is that people are happy to be someplace safe, but they are really struggling with how to do their jobs. And as Frank said, you have to find some balance here. And I think your way of thinking about it is an important one.
Any other comment? Cynthia, please.
One of the things we tried to do in the report was to suggest a slightly more nuanced view of security that took into account the fact that even if the secure building exists and is comfortable, if it's 20 miles outside the city, you are going to then have officers who are going to be out a great deal of the time. So we tried to suggest, at least looking forward for new building projects, to take into account not only the physical location of the building, but what are then the implications and how are people then going to do their jobs, and what are the overall implications then, and to have, as John said, a sort of more fluid concept of security. And that then, to tie into some earlier points, relates back to a question that I got in one of my interviews from a foreign service national in one of our embassies in the Middle East who'd served there for 25 years, and she said the question she keeps getting is, where are you? And, the building is there, it's big, it's huge. But the question that she got was for the American presence. Where are you? Where are the programs that we used to enjoy from you? Where are your, distinguished visitors, your visiting troops, your visiting companies, whatever? Where where is America? We see France, Germany, England, Spain, a whole lot of other countries here we don't see you, and that gets back to the funding and resource question, which I think can't be underscored enough.
One of the interesting things I thought in the discussion among commissioners was that what started out in some ways as a commission about the buildings turned out to be a commission not about the buildings but about the job and about how America is represented abroad, and I think you make that point really well.
David Turk.
On the House Oversight Committee, I'm the staff director with the National Security and Foreign Affairs Subcommittee, and we've actually been looking at some of these issues, and I think this report's fantastic and will hopefully elevate the dialogue. Question for you all, both up there or others in the audience. What can Congress do? Obviously, there's the appropriations side. Unfortunately, I don't work on that side. I work on the other side, the oversight side. We're thinking of having some hearings here in part to highlight the excellent work that you all have done, in part to try to kick this discussion up, hopefully even get it outside the beltway, as they say. What advice would you all have? What can we do in terms of hearings? What can we do in terms of that broader public debate, themes, those kinds of things? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Comments from any of our colleagues?
If I might just say, one of the things that's in the report that I think would be very useful is to begin any conversation that diplomacy is a national security tool of the United States. We've said in this report that Americans have to break through this idea that diplomacy is about concessions and weakness and sort of things that you do when you don't want to do anything serious, and that's not right. Diplomacy is about national security. So I think to the extent that leaders in our country, members of Congress, members of the executive, members of the public, all of you, who can speak out and say that diplomacy is a national security tool, I think that would be a very helpful thing. And then second, I think you put your finger on it. I don't know about outside the beltway, but certainly for a beginning, to highlight these issues and let people talk about them a little bit would be very important. That is especially true, sir, I think, about the questions of risk. Because you can't be in a position, and I think the Commission believed that you can't put the Secretary of State or Undersecretary for in a position of deciding, well, I'm going to just take more risk for people at the State Department. That's not a State Department decision. That's a society decision in which it seems to me our legislators have a huge role. And so I think we would have failed if tomorrow morning the State Department would issue a statement saying, yes, we read this report and terrific, we're now going to take more risk. That's not the way to do this. And so some kind of dialogue among those people who are responsible and hold ambassadors responsible for the safety and security of their missions needs to be part of this, and I hope that your hearings will help you do that.
I'd like to see that we ban the term junket because, members of Congress need to travel. We're all better off when they travel and see our postings overseas. And so anything we can do to encourage your members to get out and see the world and see these embassies would be good, in my opinion. Joe.
I haven't read the report, but I wonder whether the commissioners discussed the future of consulates in various countries. Being in Switzerland, we closed two, we had 50, ended up with one embassy.
Yeah, Mike, you may not have heard the question was, what about consulates? Did we address the issue of consulates?
Yes, sir. What we did was, as a commission, we addressed the issue of all kinds of different platforms. And our philosophy was that the platform issue should be, first and foremost, decentralized. And that the country team in every country ought to have a menu of decentralized platforms. So if consulates made the most sense, absolutely. If American Presence Posts made the most sense, absolutely. If virtual presence posts made the most sense, and I would direct you to that part of the report, a very interesting experiment the State Department is doing to try to create a presence in major cities abroad virtually, that would be useful. We also recommended an increased use of circuit riders. And so our objective, sir, was to levy this requirement on the country team, that the country team should make this decision and the department should support it. And that off this menu of decentralized platforms, that whatever made sense for the country ought to be the choice of the embassy.
I'd like to add one thing that I found extremely helpful in our mission, and that was that we had the agricultural department there. And And what they did in their outreach all across Spain, from the agricultural standpoint, was extremely helpful in our diplomacy. And the same thing was certainly true of the Commerce Department. I mean, the Commerce Department in Spain had a total number of employees, which included perhaps some young ones that were Spanish that were helping there as interns, but we had 42 people. And they were spread out all over the country, which was extremely helpful. And I think these other departments, besides the State Department, can play an extremely important role in our outreach, and should, and we need to support that.
I think that's a wonderful way to conclude what has been a very interesting discussion. Let me just again say thank you to our co-chairs for just having done a wonderful job with this, and all of our commissioners. I'm very grateful that you took time out of your personal lives to do this. Now, Secretary Four asked that you all come forward and take a picture with her, and we'll let everybody else leave at their leisure. But please do stay so we can get a picture, our commissioners. Please come. Ann, did you want? Oh, I have one thing.
Ann.
Forgive me. I have one little thing I've got to do. It is my personal custom that when I give, these are called talking sticks, and it is the custom in the Indian tribes in the Pacific Northwest that you give your chief a talking stick. And so for our two co-chairs, I have talking sticks for each of you as a symbol of thanks for what you did.
Thank you. Thank you.